This is Cyber Smokehouse, and I'm Ernie.
And I'm Graeme.
Join us as we grill the minds, dig into the experience, and serve up the stories of leaders in cybersecurity.
Cyber Smokehouse is sponsored by TBD Cyber, a cybersecurity strategy consulting firm. Well, today's guest is someone we're really excited to have on the show. He's a cyber risk strategist, security executive, fear thought leader, and educator. He's nationally recognized expert in cyber risk quantification, translating technical threats into business-aligned decisions. He's a Georgia Tech faculty member, a trusted advisor known for bridging security, leadership, and real-world execution. He's a director and the Business Information Security Officer at IHG Hotels and Resorts. Jimmy Lummis, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Graeme. Nice to be here.
All right, Jimmy, so let's light the fire and crank up the heat in the smokehouse. So, hey, we don't like to beat around the bush, and we like to just dive right into it. So, straight to it. So, what do you think are the biggest challenges, cybersecurity challenges in the industry today?
Great question. So, I think there's obviously lots of challenges. I think most people would probably point to AI and what's going on there, all of the new both capabilities and threats that brings, and threats both in the form of we're trying to adopt AI and how's it going to be used against us? But then also, what are the threat actors doing? But I think a lot of the problems that are persistent today are still some of the traditional problems that we've always been fighting with. It's easy to jump on the bandwagon of what's new. But how do you solve for the old things? How do you get the biggest bang for your buck from a security perspective, and drive risk down to the best of your ability as a security leader, given the resourcing that you have to use, right? And stay abreast of the threat environment and make sure that you're doing the best you can with what you got. So that's probably the biggest challenge I see, is people still struggle with, how do I solve for all of the problems?
Yes, I appreciate you not taking us down an AI angle.
Steer away from AI, because I think that's what everybody talks about.
We have to talk about it and probably touch on it in some form. But yes, we talk about traditional risk angles and measuring risk. And I think you are right. So please, let's go down that path. Take us down a different path.
We could probably talk a little bit about FAIR and the FAIR methodology and what is it and how did I come by it. So FAIR, if you don't know, stands for Factor Analysis of Information Risk. And it's an open source framework for how to think about and quantify cyber risk. And what's interesting about it is it gets us away from kind of the old school methods of how do we enhance our security programs, thinking in terms of red, yellow, green, high, medium, low. What do I present to the board? I know I'll do another maturity assessment against the NIST framework. And we went from level 3 maturity to level 3.1 maturity, right? And so, well, what does that even mean? And, how does that actually address the latest threats, right? If somebody comes to me as a leader and says, gosh, I heard about scattered spider, how do we fare against scattered spider? And if you tell them, oh, we're a 3.1, okay. Does that mean we're about to get hacked or no? I don't know what that means, right? So when I was at Georgia Tech operationally, so I am faculty still at Georgia Tech, but at one point I was the CISO at Georgia Tech for multiple years. I faced the same problem that all CISOs face, right? So you have to present to your executive leadership, maybe to your board. They're going to ask you hard questions. And a lot of those questions, especially, I think it's still probably true today. Many security organizations get funded after something bad happens, right? So that's a story that's as old as cybersecurity itself. But at some point, after heavy investment, the board is going to start asking things like, okay, are we secure now? And you keep coming back asking for more. At what point are we done investing in this? And can I get back to directing my resources to things that are actually going to generate a return for us as a business? And, as the CISO, that was something that I was not prepared to answer at the time, right? I was like, well, we want to get to a 3.2 maturity, right? We're at a 3.1, we're almost there. Or you face your own team that's saying, hey, we really need this new tool in order to fight off the bad guys. And you're like, okay, but we spent all our money, so I guess I got to go back and ask for more. Right? That's always an uncomfortable place to be. And I did not have a a language to communicate those things to the board effectively. I started noodling on it myself, right? Just trying to think of what's a better way to do this? How could I communicate these sorts of things? And started coming up with, you used to hear people talk about it all the time, right? You need to talk in the language of business and think about the business. And says, okay, well, what's something that they might understand? And on my own, I kind of came up with kind of this spectrum that said, here's the total amount of money that we have at Georgia Tech, right? And this is where I was, right? At the bottom end of the spectrum, we have to spend at least enough to be compliant with the regulations and the laws and the contracts that apply to us, right? But we can do that pretty cheap, right? I can go get a bunch of open source tools and we can become minimally compliant. That's table stakes. On the top end of this spectrum, there's the set of all money that Georgia Tech has. Obviously, we're not going to spend that much. So really the name of the game is we have to figure out where on this spectrum we want to draw the line that says, what's the right amount of money that we feel comfortable spending to buy down the risk that we're facing? It's like, okay, that's starting to get in the right direction. And I started playing with how might you do that? And that's when I actually stumbled across FAIR, because it's not enough to just kind of, thumb in the wind and say, I think we'll draw the line here. Well, how did you arrive at that? Because that's going to be the next question that gets asked, right? Why? Why here and not over here or over here? And so what FAIR allows you to do is actually try to quantify the risk that you're facing as an organization. So it's not necessarily rocket science. It's using a lot of the classical risk quantification or risk calculation methodologies that we've all studied, right? If you've ever taken the CISSP exam, you know that it's right. Likelihood and impact equals risk, right? The same thing, but and that is hundreds of years old, right? So those methodologies were created by the original insurance underwriters as they were insuring ships that were sailing across the Atlantic to the New World, right? And they didn't want to lose all the valuable tea that they were shipping from the UK to the US, right? So they're known methodologies. It's a framework and a language that anybody in finance already understands, or anybody that's in the insurance industry already understands. And all that, the people that created FAIR did was basically say, okay, let's adapt this model to cyber. And then think about, okay, instead of ship sinking being the bad thing that happens, it's threat actor attacks us and they attack us in this way. And if they attack us in this way, system goes down or system gets ransomware, right? Or data gets stolen. Okay, that's the bad thing. What's at stake? Okay, well, we can talk about that too, right? So what's at stake might be, I have a million sensitive records of my customers. I have, 100,000 credit card numbers, or the system is critical to our daily operations. And if it goes down, then we're losing $1 million a day, right? Okay, great. Now I know kind of what's at stake. And we can add some deeper levels of computation around, okay, how persistent is the threat actor? What is their ability to attack us? Or the specific ways they're going to attack us? What's our ability to resist the attack, right? Which we call controls, right? So that's our firewalls and our endpoint detection and all the other things. And then you lump those two things together and that's your likelihood. And then, but what's at stake, right? If the bad things happen and then, it goes much deeper than just the basic numbers. There's all sort of secondary loss factors that you can calculate really to your heart's desire to dial in those numbers. And then it's old school Monte Carlo simulations, doing it the way that, insurance industries have been doing it forever. And you're now able to quantify and compute these things. Okay, great. Now I have the methodology to really put some meat behind the thing that I'm concerned about, to say, okay, here's who I'm worried about. Here's how they're going to attack us. Here's how I might be able to defend that. Here's how I'm not good at defending that. If I get compromised, this is what it's going to cost us. Great. That's how I draw the line now, right? And now I can have a more meaningful conversation with my executives. I don't have to go into depth about bits and bytes and firewalls and endpoint detection. I can say, you guys have heard of Scattered Spider. Here's where we stack up against the way that they're attacking people. Here's where we're still exposed. And if the bad thing happens to these particular systems, this is what that means to us from a financial perspective. Are we comfortable with this much exposure? Yes or no? And if we're not, then here's 3 things that we can do to improve ourselves based on the way that they're specifically attacking people. And if I do A, it reduces risk by this much. If I do B, it reduces risk by, this much, and C, and so on and so forth. And then it allows you to facilitate a more business focused discussion about how much do you want to spend buying down risk, right? And that's a much better conversation to have where we can really start to get to the nitty gritty. And then eventually my goals are to, start to see this level of maturity in other areas of risk, right? So um, it's kind of interesting that in a lot of what I'm seeing is cyber organizations are actually getting much more advanced and in how we're computing these things. And we're actually exceeding the other areas of risk, like, human capital risk, finance risk, right? The other areas of business where now they have to, hopefully they can catch up leveraging similar methodologies. And then we can start to have apples to apples conversations, right? I had a very interesting email exchange with a gentleman who's the head of enterprise risk. And, he was sending me an article. Basically, the gist of the article was, at what point are we going to stop spending money and everybody treating cyber as the top risk? And I wrote him back and I said, I would love that day to come because it means that we've quantified all of the areas and we can have a real apples to apples conversation about what is the biggest risk. Maybe we have invested enough to buy down risk to an appropriate levels for cyber and we can start to focus on the other areas, right? And that's when I think, collectively in the risk space, we're going to kind of reach nirvana. That's my goal.
Yeah. I mean, the cool thing about that too is, it forces the business to think about what their risk tolerance is, right? Because now you're communicating and it's like, well, what, X million dollars, are we prepared to lose X million dollars? Is that an acceptable level of risk? Because there is, you can't guarantee 100% security. So there's always a risk of loss. So what level of risk are we prepared to accept, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. Right. What level of residual risk is okay, right? And the answer may not always be add more security controls. Maybe we need to bump our insurance coverage, right? And that's going to cover the delta where we're more comfortable with that. And hopefully at some point the answer is, you know what, I think we're good right now,
Jimmy, how have you found that? I think, from my experience, there's a couple of challenges, right? One is acceptance of this, I think both in the security community as well as within the business, right? So let's talk about that first. How have you found that and how have you overcome any of those challenges?
Yeah, I think the obvious challenge, there's always a bit of skepticism about these things, right? And it's both in the business and in the security community themselves. I think first and foremost, right, when you start mentioning things like Monte Carlo simulation, right, people's eyes glaze over and they're like, oh God, please stop talking. So I think there's a bit of hesitation in the security space amongst security practitioners because it's not in our comfort zone, right? We're technologists. We like playing with our technology and, thinking about, security tooling and, all of that sort of stuff. We're not necessarily all huge fans of, probability and statistics, right? And it is very much in kind of that space. And I think the reason that, you're starting to see FAIR take off a bit more lately, as opposed to, it's been around for a decade or more, right? So it's not brand new, but you're hearing about it a lot more recently because now there's tooling behind it to support using it, right? So you don't actually have to go off and try and create some crazy spreadsheet and take up a bunch of compute cycles running Monte Carlo simulations manually with, no real confidence in yourself that, did I even do this right? And, that I can tell you the first time we piloted this, it took about 6 months to do one because we were trying to do it manually, right? And that's just one risk assessment around one very specific risk of one system, right? So that doesn't scale very well, right? So if you're the CISO and you're trying to make big picture decisions about the entire organization, it's like, okay, well, I'll have the data to make these decisions in about 2 decades, right? So what we needed is the technology to come along to support this capability, and the technologies are here now, right? And so it's a little bit of a nascent space from the technology perspective, but you've got some key players that are really pushing the limit on this, and making some very excellent tooling that have a lot of sort of deep integration capabilities and allow you to plug in a lot of direct telemetry to do these sort of calculations. And they're doing it constantly, right? So instead of just, okay, execute one time, give me a number, it can be very much, I've got the the dream that is the CISO's ERP dashboard, where you can just pull it up and say, okay, each morning, what's my current level of risk? Am I up? Am I down? Right? If I'm up, what happened? Did something change in the environment that caused this to do that? So I don't know that we're fully there yet, but that we're edging closer towards that. So the capabilities are there now to, I think, take away some of that difficulty in the learning curve and in the adoption that it would take to do it that was there before. I think there's also a bit of hesitation to move away from what's comfortable, right? So, if you're a seasoned CISO, especially if you've been at your organization for quite some time, you're not necessarily advantaged to come in with something brand new. If the conversations you've been having with the board have been resonating and you've been doing it for, 3, 6, 9, however many years, deciding to all of a sudden redecorate may not be the wisest move. So I get those things, right? But I think if you're in a space, you're struggling kind of the same way that I did, in what to present, or you're a new CISO to the organization, it's the perfect time to kind of rethink these things. And especially too, even if you are sort of, if you've been in seat for a while at an organization, if you're starting to hear those same questions around, gosh, are we not done yet? And, are we secure yet? Have we not spent enough money yet? Then it's definitely time to pivot, right? You can't keep talking about the latest maturity assessment.
And how have you found the acceptance on the business side?
Yeah. So on the business side, right, that I had to learn this, as a part of the cycle of learning how to actually apply this. And I tell people the same thing as well. They're always going to come with skepticism first. Right. So when you present them, whether it's a very targeted risk assessment or something at the enterprise layer, the first thing that they're going to do is start attacking the numbers, right? And saying, well, where did this come from? And what was the methodology? And how do you know it's this? And how did you derive this particular number? And show me your source data. And, where did you get this number from? And who did you talk to get that? Right. There is an education component that comes along with adopting, this methodology that you just have to plan for as part of your implementation cycle. Know that there's a lot of that just sort of initial mindset getting almost through the stages of grief, right? And then coming to agreement that, oh, okay, right. The people you source these numbers from, those are the right people or the right reports. I agree with all of the inputs. We've done this a couple times now. I can start to accept the output of this. And there's a little bit of sticker shock that comes along with it too, right? Because, from my perspective, I don't want to boil the ocean with this. So I tend to, for my program, focus on the systems and the processes that matter most to the business. But since they matter most, they also represent the most amount of potential loss magnitude. And so when you're presenting large numbers, to the business, there's that initial oh my God, what are you talking about? Is the house on fire? How bad is this? And why is this number so big? And so you have to kind of go through and get them comfortable with the fact that, it's that big because that's how much this system generates for us, right? So that doesn't mean if the bad things happen that we're going to lose the, total loss magnitude. It's probably going to be more down here because our likelihood numbers are lower, right? And just because the bad guys get in doesn't mean they steal the set of all data that you have, maybe they only got half of it, right? So there's one thing that you have to be clear with about people is this is not, predicting the future, right? I can run the simulation. It could say there's a 50% likelihood that this thing happens in the next year, and it may not happen at all, right? It may happen 10 times. We don't really know, right? All this is a way to kind of make directionally correct apples and apples comparison. So it's not about this one thing is exactly going to happen and therefore we must do this. It's more like amongst the universe of bad things that could happen, here are the various things that could. And if you compare them all in the same way by doing the same calculations and doing the same inputs, then this one is more likely to happen than this one, which is more likely to happen than this one. And if these were to happen, these are the relative levels of impact we would likely experience. And then in comparison, we can do these three things, and that's how they stack up amongst each other relative to the particular threat, right? That doesn't mean if we invest in this thing over here, we're guaranteed not to have an incident, right? It doesn't mean that, you're guaranteed to have 5 or that you're guaranteed to experience this much loss, right? None of this is about making predictions. It's about supporting decision making. That's all it is.
Yeah, that's awesome. The other objection, or the other, I think, challenge that people often refer to is just the perceived lack of data. But I think there's enough, maybe you can comment on this, that there are methods in estimation science and stuff that where you can get good enough estimates to be able to use those in your calculations, right? Even if you lack some data.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that there's a series of kind of muscles you have to build to be able to do this sort of thing. So it's not just about plugging it into the tool and letting the tool run the Monte Carlo simulations. You have to start to build some capability around collecting all the source data, right? And any reasonably mature security organization is probably already going to have the controls telemetry. They'll be able to tell you for, generally speaking, across a standard suite of controls, what's our existing maturity, right? What's the coverage that we have of this thing? All those sorts of things. The two other areas that are a little less common, as far as whether you have it or not, or what level of maturity, you want either an outsourced or insourced cyber threat intelligence capability to be able to align yourself to the real threats that your company is facing. So you're simulating against reality instead of just sort of, imaginary, whatever it could be. That will really ground the work that you're doing in the real threat, right? And make sure that you're focused on what matters. The other is the actual collection of the financial impact information, right? So that is a muscle that most security teams and technologists are not used to doing. So step one in our instances has always been to go to the tech owners for key systems, to the business owners, and start asking those questions. And even they, while they may know top level financials for the company, not many people have sat and thought about how much revenue is generated by this system, right? And so that starts to take some time to work with the right resources, come up with, good enough methods. And I think the key is consistency. So if you settle on a formula for how you want to derive a particular financial number for a system, make sure you write that down, list it in your assumptions. And then when you start going through the stages of grief with the business, that you pull that back out and say, okay, well, we worked with this person. This is what we arrived at. And then just be prepared. They're like, oh, no, the better way to do that would have been this, this, and this. Okay, great. We can take that back. We can adjust. And then let's, document that for perpetuity. And then once you settle on what it is that is good enough or good, then it's rinse, repeat, right? You've got it captured. You can do it the same way year after year.
Yeah, and a good place. I mean, you can start with if you've done any sort of business impact analysis for BCP. That's a good place to start, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. So if you have a mature BCP function, that's a great place to go. They hopefully have done all that work for you already.
Yeah. At least it's a starting point. You can always refine those estimates and stuff as you go. I know you and I have talked about, I'm interested to get your perspective on this, the applying risk quantification to third-party risk. And I know you've got some specific opinions on kind of how evaluating third-party risks. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing there, or what you're trying to do.
We're going to have him come back a full episode all on that.
Yeah, you just that's my trigger word, third-party risk management. So I happen to own third-party risk management at IHG as well. I feel like as an industry, we have spent a lot of money and built large apparatuses around third-party risk that do absolutely nothing. We exchange a lot of questionnaires back and forth to each other. And, on average, if you really think that you're successful, you've probably got some canned security language and some contracts. But, on the whole, really, we do a lot of paper pushing, and we pat ourselves on the back saying we did excellent. And we really have advanced the needle when we add, that 301st question to our questionnaire. And now that's the one question that's really going to call out what was at risk at our third parties. And we're guaranteed not to have a bad day anymore, which is ludicrous to me, right? So, the simple fact that our third parties just continuously get compromised, because everybody gets compromised, and yet our third party risk management functions have really not done anything to drive down the risk of that either happening or what's our remedy if that bad thing happens. And I'll tell you from the other side of the coin, right? So, on this side, I'm peppering all over third party companies and asking them the things and asking for SOC 2 reports and pen tests and blah, blah, blah. We might make some adjustments to security language in the contract. We sign the contract, it goes away for 1, 2, 3, 5 years, however long the contract was. And that's the last we hear of it. We do some monitoring and they may get breached. And, we try to dig in and figure out was data breached and do we need to take some action and do those things, which is all fine. That's what everybody's doing. But, having sat on the other side of that, when I was the CISO at Georgia Tech is a university. Most people understand it, as a university, and, they teach students and that sort of thing. They're also, they do research, which is actually the number one thing they do. And they have research contracts with thousands and thousands of research sponsors. And many of those research sponsors do the same thing. They send us all their security questionnaires. I had to stand up an apparatus to answer those questions. And one thing that I find highly entertaining is, you end up with probably your most junior person that's answering these questions that probably doesn't have a very deep understanding of your security organization in the first place. They're sending it across to the other organization that sent you the questionnaire, to their lowest level person that's just checking it from a standard set of responses that they're looking for. And you have these two people that are not very deep at, trying to make these big picture decisions about cyber risk for both sides of the coin. It's like, oh, okay, so that's probably the first fail. And then from there, let's presume that ultimately we agree to some special contract language as an outcome of this whole process. And now understand that, when I was at Tech, we had thousands of these contracts. Right. So I, as the CISO, how on earth am I supposed to actually design and run a security organization that satisfies the specific needs of 1,000 different customers and 1,000 different ways that they wanted their security done? Right. But it's not possible. And so the logical next step from there is, okay, do you think anybody's actually running that sort of a custom security program that's satisfying the contracts of every one of their customers? The answer is no. In reality, I don't think anybody is, right? So we just do this dance and we come up with a contract. And at the end of the day, it sits on a shelf somewhere. And, I, as the CISO, do the best I can to run my security organization. And then when the bad thing happens, they start asking me questions. And we just go through this routine, but we haven't really accomplished anything, right? Other than satisfying regulatory obligations. So what I would love to see us do is move away from that whole model. Right. So when we started moving to the cloud and started entrusting third parties with our business and our business operations, the whole vision was, we want that transfer because, maybe that's not a differentiator for us as a business. Right. I don't need to be in the business of running commodity mail. Neither do you guys. Neither does most of the world. That's why almost everyone uses Office 365 or Google, you name it. Okay, cool. We transferred all of that. What we failed to do was to transfer the risk along with that, right? So we pay big dollars. We include some things about risk transfer. So if you're good, you've got RPOs and RTOs, and hopefully you'll get your business operations back up and running. But if I, as a business, really experience loss as a function of something my third-party provider did, I've got very little recourse. Right. And, so I didn't win in the arms race to get them to build their security program to perfect security based on my 301st question in my questionnaire thing. Okay. Then they get compromised. I'm out, however much money, and I'm just stuck. Right. So what I actually think would be a better approach is, first off, let's stop just, shoveling paper around. Let's stop just sending each other endless questionnaires. If you want to know something about my security program, really dial it in and let's ask some really meaningful questions, but just endless questionnaires doesn't really do a whole lot. And then at the end of the day, I want to actually trust you. I'm trusting you to run my business operations because I'm handing you the reins to this piece of technology so that you run it on my behalf. I should also then trust you to secure that thing. And in most instances, I would think people generally assume that is the case, that we've trusted them to run that sort of stuff. So why am I trying to stipulate this and that in the contract that you have to, do vulnerability management this particular way instead of that way, and so on and so forth? So let's get away with trying to tell, our peer CISOs how to do their job. Let them do their job to the best of their ability. And let's focus in on dialing in the limits of liability, right? That's where I think we should be going. And that's the next area I'm trying to push for. Okay, cool. Well, how do I decide where we should negotiate the limits of liability? Number two, we've got this thing called risk quantification, right? Now I can start to put a number behind that aligns to a standard methodology that's industry accepted, that has data behind it that we can agree to, right? And if we could want to negotiate, that's fine, right? We can come to is it really this much revenue at risk or this many records? But once we agree to that, now I'm going to run it through my calculation process and come out the other end and say, look, here's our annualized loss exposure for this particular platform and doing business with you based on what I understand about the financial inputs, the threat actors, who's targeting you, who's targeting me, and what's at risk with this particular system that's supporting our business, right? Okay, well, let's whatever it is. Let's say it's $1 million. Great. Now we've got a place to start negotiating. Maybe we don't land exactly on $1 million, but I've got a reasonable place to start that then if you have a bad day, just know I'm not going to dictate to you how to protect your environment. But if you do have a bad day and it impacts me to the tune of $1 million, then I'm going to come to you and say, okay, you owe me $1 million, right? And that's something that we can actually get behind and say, now we're starting to really limit our risk, right? Now when the bad thing happens, it's not me that's impacted.
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
It does. At least I think it does.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an embedded process now that, it's kind of like unwinding.
I mean, our regulations require it, right? I don't know that I'll ever fully get away from it because you still have to satisfy the law, but I would like to add to what we do and really achieve some risk reduction in the process as opposed to singing our praises for adding one more question.
Well, our third party guy likes to joke that, eventually now, and circling back to AI is, eventually AI is going to generate the questionnaire, send it out to, the vendor, and the vendor's going to have an AI, agent that's going to do it. It's going to be AI that's just arguing with each other until they come up with something, and then we don't know what the answer is going to be. So,
but you laugh, but that is about to be here, right? That's already happening.
Well, so I'll tell you, so when I, it's been a while since I've been a deep practitioner, and I used to do all the maturity ratings. And so Graham's been getting me to see the light with the risk quant. And this has been fascinating for me. And it's really good to hear your story. So I will ask the dumb guy question because I'm probably the dumb guy when it comes to doing all this stuff in fair. If I'm out there listening to this and I'm like, you know what, I want to build this program. Like, well, how do I start? What do I do? And then just to pile on that, if I'm a mid-sized company, is this only things that, Fortune 500 need to tackle, or is it something, a mid-sized company could tackle? So is there anything like, where do you start if you don't have a full, fair program? Like,
yeah. So I would encourage you to just go to the FAIR website, right? So, I think general FAIR membership is free. They offer training, they offer certifications. And so that's some of the easy ways to kind of just start to dip your toe into it and then get a sense of what it is. But I would really encourage people. So the FAIR organization has chapters around the country, and the chapters hold meetings, that each chapter does it a little bit different. I'm the co-chair of the chapter here in Atlanta. And so we meet quarterly. We invite guest speakers. We have a small but growing community of practitioners, people that are using it every single day. And I think, the best way to do anything really is through building relationships, getting to know the people that have had successes and failures and lessons learned along the way that you don't have to then repeat. And I think, that's an obvious way, in my opinion, to get started for free or cheap. You can start to investigate the tools that are out there. If you want to just kind of jump right in, I'm sure the vendors would love to talk to you. And, I've seen both instances where people kind of take the time to learn it, pilot it in-house before they go engage with a vendor and really pay for product. But I also have seen other companies that have no capability and they start directly with the product and start trying to build the capability around it. I would actually advise people to start, we talked about the kind of the muscle that you need to build to collect the inputs before you can really start to do the calculations. So if you wrap all that up, I call that cyber risk management. So getting into the discipline of measuring, understanding what are your high value asset systems, what level of, security do you have for each one of them, measuring that on a regular basis, because you'll need all those things anyways to do the calculations. Start to build the muscle around, engaging with the business, putting some numbers around what's at stake, right? What is the financial impact around all of these things? Do all that. That's all free, right? Or if you may have to transition resources and put somebody on it, but that's all stuff that you can do right now without having to really dig into risk quantification first, and you'll need it later anyways, right? So I would encourage people to start doing that and thinking about that.
Side of the company, like, is it a big company thing only, or is it a mid?
So I think anybody can do it, but I do think that there is probably a lower limit, and there's also probably a timing aspect to this that's where it's not necessarily useful either. So if you're coming in as a security leader into a green field in an organization that really has nothing, you don't need risk quant, right? Go grab any framework. You need some firewalls, you need some policies, you need EDR, you know what you need, right? Getting to from 0 to 80, you don't really need risk quant for that. It's follow all the standard playbook stuff, okay? Going from 80 to 100 is where risk quantification really has value, in my opinion, right? When you have to start making hard decisions around your next investment, or whether you have, or then if you have to answer the question around, are we secure? Or, your security team's coming to you now that you've got all the other stuff out of the way, and they've got their 20 pet projects that they all want to work on. How do you decide what's going to get the biggest bang for the buck? Right. It's kind of once you reach that 80% level of maturity that I think you'd get the most value out of risk quantification. But I do think, medium-sized companies can do this as well. Some of the tools that I talked about are not super expensive. So there is capability in that industry if you wanted to do that. But at the end of the day, this is all stuff that if you wanted to, you could, in theory, just do this in a spreadsheet, right? It's going to take a while to run, but you can do it that way if you really wanted to. I don't personally advise it. You might end up running away too fast. So.
All right. Well, this is good. So I do want to switch gears on you a little bit because we do want to learn a little bit more about you as well. We're going to touch on leadership style. So obviously, it sounds like you're running pretty big teams. Tell us a little bit about some of the top things that you do with your team that work well, just to make sure everybody's working well together and, working as a cohesive team.
I have a style. I think if I were to ask some of my employees, I have a professor style, whether I'm in the classroom or not, right? So I tend to want to teach and explain things to them and really try to develop them as the way I do things, right? So I don't want to, sometimes I think we all, if we've been at it for a while, have a tendency to want to just jump in and grab the keyboard and just do it ourselves. So I work hard to resist that urge and make sure that, I let my team do their work, trust them to do their work, and then help them make sure that what they're delivering is quality and make sure that I'm investing in them and teaching them along the way. My two risk guys, when they came to me, they had very little experience in risk. And so, we had multiple 4, 6, 8-hour brainstorm sessions last year as we were building out this program and the frameworks for all the things we were doing, where we literally went through controls frameworks, control by control, and I explained what it meant. How did the control work? How did it apply in an enterprise? Because a lot of the people that kind of come to risk is often thought of as a GRC function. And a lot of people that are in the GRC space are not necessarily coming from the technology side of the house. They might have come from technology audit or even accounting, places like that. And they landed in the security space in that field. And I think we presume a lot of times that people have this deep understanding of security. And so sometimes we just got to check ourselves and make sure we're really focused and investing in our people. I also like to push them out of their comfort zones. So I make them get up on stage and present, and they thank me eventually.
I mean, that's tough for, security tends to have a lot more introverts. So yeah, that's the warm. Yeah. So what I'm also curious, I think this hits a lot of what I'm about to ask you too, as far as retaining talent, but it's cybersecurity is still pretty competitive. So it can't always be money. So are there other things that you do to really make people stick around and want to work for you and continue with the organizations you work with? Anything that you found that really worked?
Yeah, well, I think if I try to build a connection with the people that I work with, personal and professional, and so I take an interest in them and their families, make sure that I'm creating an environment where they feel comfortable, one, making their mistakes, but living their normal lives too, recognizing that we have a life outside of work and that we need to be respectful of all of that. But one of the key things I like to do too is, I was just talking about being professorial. I like to really invest in my people, right? And so, I make it my goal to grow my people, and I tell them that up front, right? My job is to develop you as a professional. You have a job to do, you're getting paid to do that job, yes, but my commitment to you is to develop you. And whether that means develop you here, or if there's not opportunity here, then to develop you and watch you, leave the nest and go to the next place. I'm not heartbroken about that. That's my goal, right? So eventually, if you do leave, then that's a win for me and for you, because that means that you're on to bigger and better things. And hopefully you'll carry that style with you wherever you go. And you've just created space for the next person to kind of come up in the organization too. So I don't really know that there is a reality where you can keep people forever. So I think what we should do is just honor the relationship there and make sure we're investing in our people while we have them.
I think that's a great attitude. I mean, I agree. You want people to be happy, and if it's not a right fit for you, it's not a right for everybody. And just it's more me, and I agree with that. So that's a good philosophy.
Jimmy, looking out for in the future, say in the next year, a couple of years, well, what's exciting for you as you think about the future in cyber? What gets your juices flowing?
Yeah. So I think for me personally, I really am looking to continue to expand and build sort of consistency and stability in the whole risk quant and third-party risk management space, especially in the third-party risk management space. So I've got a lot going on right now, and trying to grow that into the direction that I want it to be. Ideally, eventually in the next 3 to 5 years, what I'm hoping to do is build a well-oiled machine that eventually, like we just talked about, we're developing our people. I want to one day hand this off to them and move on to the next interesting challenge and know that it's in good hands and that I've really developed them in the program enough where it's very smooth and delivering consistently on all the things and without a lot of, change or chaos being injected into the process. And then I think, there's a couple of burgeoning areas in security that I think are interesting. And, I'm not going to talk about AI because everyone talks about AI. But I think one of the other buzzwords you're starting to hear, which it's always what's old is new again. Everyone's talking about resilience, which at one time we used to call business continuity. Right? And there's this cool phrase called minimal viable company or minimal viable business. And right, it's so interesting how these things just get rebranded and recycled. But I think that this is an area that people have tried to get good at. There's definitely organizations that have built very mature capabilities in this space, but it's an area that I think on the whole, most people struggle with, right? And not only did they struggle before, but they're struggling for all the new reasons that we struggle, right? So we've handed off all of our technology to the cloud and to other people, which we talked about in the TPRM space. Well, great. What does that mean for me? How do I guarantee resilience when I'm not in control anymore directly, right? What does that model look like? And then you can think about what is whatever the next hype cycle is, because I'm still not going to talk about AI. Right. Like there's always these new things and new challenges that come along. And then as they get woven into the business, how do we reframe and rethink about resiliency and those perspectives? So I think that's something that's going to be exciting in the future too.
Yeah. 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 Very cool. I was watching a episode of the Pit last night, and they've got all their systems went down for it because they were under a cyber attack, and so they had to run the emergency room back on paper, and it was like no one knew what to do.
So Jimmy, we want to learn a little bit more about you too, and learn about your journey into cybersecurity. So were you like most of us and fell into it, or did you just know from a young age you're like, that's what I'm going to do? So how did you end up getting into cybersecurity?
It was the winter of '79. I was 6 months old.
Yeah, I remember the day.
It was that day. No, I honestly, that was not my intention initially. I went to undergrad, studying computer science, right? I wanted to be a game developer, like every, young man at that age. Um, and, I studied it, I learned it. I started co-oping and I co-opted, actually Bell South. And what I realized is that the vast majority of software developers work in business applications, and they do what I considered at the time very boring and mundane work. And please, for all of your fans out there that are software developers, I apologize. I don't mean that to be condescending. It just wasn't for me. And I took an information security class just out of randomly in my undergrad, and I really enjoyed it. And then, I graduated and I'm out there, looking for jobs as graduates do. I apply for all these roles out there, and I've got a couple offers to do software development, but I happen to spot a role as a security advisor for what used to be called Ernst & Young, is now EY. And your own Graeme Payne was the gentleman that hired me into EY some 23, 24 years ago now. So he's who brought me into this. And so for any of you that are annoyed by me and have to work with me, you can thank Graeme. So yeah, that's how I fell into it. And I've done it ever since. My whole career has been in the information security space. I started off in advisory work, and led implementations around security tooling, identity and access management stuff. I got off the consulting side of the house and started doing, internal, blue team type security, defensive security. I did it for state government and higher ed, and for healthcare, and now for hospitality.
Well, the good thing is you're still talking to Graham, so you don't hate him for pulling you in that decision. So that's good.
Not at all. I owe so much to Graeme. Like, honestly, if he had not taken a chance on me, who knows, I'd still be slaving away commenting code somewhere.
So do you have any advice for the youngins that are coming up through the ranks in this day and age?
Yeah, so I get asked this question a fair bit. So I still teach, so I'm a part of the faculty at Georgia Tech. And so a lot of my students will ask me this, or a lot of young people that, are friends with families that I know will ask me these sorts of questions. And so what I try to tell people is two things. Fundamentally, information security is a technical discipline, right? So you may be coming at it as a lawyer, you may be coming at it, from another angle, but at the end of the day, we concern ourselves with the security of technology and data, right? So you should know something about technology if you want to play in this space. So the people that I think are best at this, they can kind of speak to the business, they understand the other aspects of it, but they should also know how security functions and how technology functions, because that's what we're responsible for securing, right? So I tell people to kind of spend some time, get deep into technology and understand what it is that we're trying to secure. Second thing I tell people, right? So most people don't necessarily understand what does it mean to really do information security, right? And, if they've ever watched like Mr. Robot or something like that, they think that it's, you're hanging out and you're with a hoodie on, or, he's got 5 people with the same hands on the same keyboard, things like that, and you're fighting off hackers. There is interesting work that happens in the, defending and investigating incidents, all that sort of stuff. There's attack and pen work that is something like that. But there's lots of flavors of what it is to be in this space, and there's lots of room for people to do different things. So, I usually try to talk to them about the various facets of information security and encourage them to go study a little bit on their own, all the various things, figure out what excites them about security, and then start to just play with that and see, is this really for me, right? And then understand there's implications to that. If you think it's super fun to go investigate incidents, right? It is super fun to go investigate incidents until the 500th time you've done it and you're being called on a Saturday night when you really just wanted to go have drinks with your friends. You know what I mean? So, there's always, puts and takes in this business. And so understand kind of all of it. I encourage them to go do internships, and, try different aspects of it. Go do an internship doing attack and pen work. Go do internships doing incident investigation work. Go do an internship, doing compliance work and see what that's like, right? I mean, you might figure out that that's actually something you really enjoy. So I encourage them to just, kind of go broad, figure out what's out there, play with the technologies, get to know it. And for those that are in school, the number one advice that I give to them is don't leave school without knowing something. The worst thing you can do is make a huge investment in a degree and think it's just about getting a piece of paper. There is a wealth of information in, very seasoned faculty and technology resources you have at your disposal. Take the time, go talk to them. If they give you access and will pay for you to go get certifications, get those before you leave, right? Take care of all of that stuff and really, make sure you're getting the value out of what it is that you're paying for in the investment.
That's great advice. That's awesome. Hey, since we cranked up the heat in the smokehouse, I can see it. I can smell the wafting smoke coming across, and the meat's getting ready here. So, tell us about your smoking experience. Are you a smoker? Do you love to smoke? What's?
I am, although my wife complains I don't do it enough. It's like I wish I had the time to do it more. So I love barbecue. I love the smoked meat. My favorite is pulled pork. So an old fashioned, pork butt is what I like to do, mostly because it's super forgiving. And if you leave it in too long, it's still good. So yeah, I have just a little vertical box smoker. It's a propane gas. It takes wood chips. And that's usually what I'll do is that. I'll throw in ribs from time to time, but that's my favorite.
Ooh, getting hungry just thinking about it. That sounds good.
What's your favorite rub?
So I don't know that I actually have a favorite because people give me rubs and it's like this, little niche rub from this little town somewhere that they found. They're like, oh, you try this. And I try it. I'm like, this is fantastic. And then I can't get it again. And so it's just, I go from one to the next and kind of, experiment here and there and figure out what I like. Really, I find it's the barbecue sauce that I care more about. And I kind of got two flavors of that. So, kind of commercial off the shelf. I'm a Sweet Baby Ray's guy. I love it. I don't know. There's just something about it that's just the right mix of sweet and kind of vinegary. But I grew up eating Eastern Carolina red vinegar style barbecue. So if you were to ask me, right, to me, what is barbecue? It's that. It's a pulled pork sandwich from Stamey's Barbecue in Greensboro, North Carolina. That's the red vinegar flavor, and they do a red vinegar slaw they put on there. And so every time I'm passing through any part of the eastern part of North Carolina, I'm trying to find a spot that I can stop and get something like that.
That's awesome. You're making me hungry. I want to drive to North Carolina now.
We'll take a road trip. Let's go.
Well, hey, Jimmy, if people want to get in touch with you or have questions about FAIR, are you out there online anywhere?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. Would love to connect and talk about FAIR, talk about third-party risk management, any of that stuff, or just security in general. That's probably the best way to find me. Just put me up on LinkedIn.
Very cool. Well, this was very informative for me. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, and thank you, audience. And if you learned something today, laughed, or had a good time, please tell someone about the podcast. This has been an exciting episode of Cyber Smokehouse, and we'll see you next time. And that wraps another episode. Thank you for joining. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at cybersmokehouse.com. Cyber Smokehouse is sponsored by TBD Cyber, a cybersecurity strategy consulting firm.
TBD Cyber works with organizations to assess their security program, develop and implement security initiatives, and optimize their security investments. We work in areas as broad as data security, risk management, cyber resilience, and security architecture. Our clients value us for our extensive expertise and independent advice, which is why we do not sell security products or deliver managed security services. If you want to work with a trusted advisor, we can help. You can learn more at tbdcyber.com. We'll see you on the next one.